A number of sightings involving lights in the sky, tall humanoids, and shapeshifters, all seen on the same beach, would be reported in a small tourist town. Although many of the witnesses believed them to be aliens, not everyone thought the same. So what could have been causing all of these sightings? Let's look at this story in detail so we can decide for ourselves what the most likely answer really is. This case begins in the small tourist city of Conillo de la Frontera, located on the southwest coast of Spain. There, several young locals would often spend their nights on the beach boardwalk, chatting, sky-gazing, and just enjoying the good weather that area often had. Specifically, this was Batelas Beach, named after the local term for a small oar-powered boat, and it was right next to the lively city center. These friends were Isabel Sanchez, 17 years old, and her brother, Lazaro Sanchez, 14 years old, Pedro Gonzalez, 21 years old, Loli Bermudez, 23 years old, and Pedro Sanchez, 19 years old. Although they came to hang out in this spot pretty frequently, nothing would prepare them for what they would see over the next couple of weeks. In September 1989, this group would start to see strange lights in the sky over the ocean. The first time it had been around 10:30 one night, when a large orange light could be seen hovering motionless in the sky. They watched it for over half an hour before it finally began to move, quickly disappearing over the horizon. Curious as to what this could be, the group decided to meet up in the same spot the next night. This time, though, one of them would bring binoculars, allowing them to get a better view of the source of the lights. At first, it appeared to be a glowing sphere with 4 white lights forming a square on the side. It would emit bright white flashes before disappearing over the ocean. Now, the 5 friends were very interested, and decided to meet up every night after this in hopes of seeing more of these flying lights. They wouldn't be disappointed either. They would see the craft a few more times. Sometimes it appeared as a sphere, while other times it was more of a half-moon shape, with both having wider red lights on the sides. They started to believe that the lights must be UFOs, and skywatching became something that the group looked forward to. But before long, their fun would turn into something more of a nightmare. On Friday, September 29th, the young adults were once again on the beach, watching a strange orange light in the sky. But this time, instead of sitting still, the light began to move closer to them. It was again in a crescent shape, and looked to have red and white lights arranged almost in a triangular pattern. The light wouldn't end up slowing down at all, flying quickly over them while at a high up altitude. About 15 minutes after this, at 10:30 p.m., they saw 2 bright white lights appearing in the sky. One flashed twice, with the other one then repeating this and flashing twice itself. This would continue for nearly half an hour. The friends would later say that they thought that the UFOs may have been communicating with each other with these flashes. But the group soon came to notice something else. Something that would deeply frighten all of them. Looking towards the shore, they would see that 2 6.5-foot tall, pale entities had appeared, standing in the shallow waters. They wore strange white robes or cloaks that almost glowed. Their form was humanoid, and they had off-white colored skin, but they didn't appear to have any facial features whatsoever. One girl in the group began to insist they all needed to leave right away, but some wanted to stick around a bit longer. Gonzalez told everybody to stay calm, and suggested that it was probably just somebody trying to play a prank on them. They watched as the 2 robed beings awkwardly moved out of the water. They walked strangely, almost as if their knees weren't capable of bending. Although the clothes hid the feet and hands, they never appeared to even move their arms, keeping them stiffly at their sides. As the 2 strange creatures grew closer, the group of friends began to panic. They finally decided to make a break for it and ran away. But within just a few moments, they noticed something. They weren't actually being chased. One of them looked back to see that the 2 had actually turned away from them and now appeared to be watching a red crescent shape in the sky. Then, out of nowhere, a blue-white tennis ball-sized light fell from the sky like a shooting star, heading straight towards the 2 robed creatures. but about 2 feet above their head it just vanished from sight. It was then that the two white beings sat stiffly down in the sand before using their arms to quickly dig out a shallow trench. After a few moments, they both just lay down on their backs next to each other. The group had calmed down a bit now and began to pass the binoculars back and forth so they could all see what was happening. It was then that another light ball, this time blue and the size of a ping pong ball, appeared over the two entities. The two began to pass it forth between them in what was called a bizarre ball game. They watched them repeat this about half a dozen times before the friends became distracted by Gonzalez, who uncharacteristically abruptly dropped the binoculars and took off running. Sanchez quickly ran after and caught up with him, and demanded to know what was going on. The terrified Gonzalez would tell him that he had actually just seen a third entity on the beach, standing a bit behind the other two. He said that this one was much larger and looked to be nearly 10 feet tall. It wore a one-piece black suit that covered most of the body, but left its head exposed. And this creature's head was huge, pear-shaped and pale, but most frightening of all, it had two large almond-shaped black eyes. Sanchez calmed him down a bit, and the two decided to return to the group without telling them of what Gonzalez had seen. They took their turn with the binoculars, but couldn't find the third entity anymore. Looking back at the other two, they noticed that they were still passing the blue light back and forth between them. Then, stunning the whole group, the two figures now began to look like a man and a woman, and even had normal-looking clothes on. The two got up out of the sand and began to walk up the boardwalk where the friends still watched on in shock. The man, now wearing jeans and a t-shirt, was over 6 feet tall, had blonde hair, pale skin, and an oddly large forehead. The woman, who apparently looked much more normal, had long dark hair and a white skirt and blouse. A couple of the young men in the group stated that she was actually quite beautiful. They thought that they actually looked similar to some of the tourists they had seen around town. Not even looking at the group, the two walked by on the boardwalk and passed right by them. They then moved into a dark alley, with some in the group saying that they entered into a nearby hotel. But then something on the beach drew their attention. Looking over, they saw a small white cloud floating over the water and towards the shore. As it hit land, it stopped and rapidly evaporated. Lolly, who was using the binoculars at that time, called out to the group, saying that she could see a strange figure standing near the water. Taking the binoculars back, Gonzalez quickly confirmed that this was the same terrifying creature that he had seen just moments earlier. It began to move westward down the beach, but oddly, it didn't even move its legs. As they observed it, they would notice that it was actually hovering about 8 inches off the ground and moved strangely fast. Out of curiosity, Gonzalez and Lazaro would actually run after the creature. The remaining friends yelled at them to come back, but they weren't listening to them. But as the two got within roughly 150 feet away, the two pursuers were drained of any courage they still had. The huge entity stopped moving and suddenly turned its head back at them, staring towards them with its large, empty black eyes. The two took this as a warning not to follow it any further, and they rushed back to the rest of the group on the boardwalk. The creature quickly disappeared from sight as the friends excitedly talked about the events they had just seen. After chatting a little longer, they would see a strange white ball light bouncing along the horizon in zigzag patterns. But with no sign of anything else happening, they decided to call it for a night and went their separate ways. But not one of them would get a good night of sleep. They would all later report that they had either been too restless or frightened that night. The day after this encounter, Gonzalez would actually say that someone told him to stay away from the beach as a group was inspecting the area. Adding on to it, he claims that he saw a lot of helicopters flying around the rest of the day. A while later, another one in the group, Lazaro, admitted that he had seen a lot of people walking around with strange devices in their hands the day after. Lolly would soon tell one of her relatives, Juan Bermudez, of what they had all seen. He too claimed that he had also seen huge figures along the beach on a couple of different occasions, so he quickly became excited after hearing all of these details. He and a local UFO investigator, Bruno Cardonosa would perform the initial investigation into the group's claims and actually made it out to the beach before all of the evidence was gone. They would first find the trench and a large amount of strangely shaped footprints all over the beach. The prints were nearly 18 inches long and 6 inches wide, with a very prominent big toe present. They were also sunk pretty deep into the sand, and both the man and woman appeared to weigh much more than a normal person. What confused the investigators the most, though, was that the prints didn't just go in a straight direction. About 20 paces away from the trench, they would find a 10-foot circle of footprints all walking in different directions. Since the witnesses never saw the two entities return or deviate from the straight path, the investigators believe that they must have came back at some point while they were distracted by the large creature with the pear-shaped head. One somehow had connections to the local newspaper, and you would use these to get their report published within just a few days. First appearing in an October 5th newspaper, this would quickly become one of Spain's biggest controversies involving extraterrestrials. This newspaper article would quickly make its way around Spain, and just 10 days after this, another investigator working for the Security and Control Office at the Cadiz Town Hall, Jesus Borrego, would arrive in town to look into these strange claims himself. He quickly located the witnesses, who all easily agreed to answer any questions he had. He then had them lead him to the spot on the beach where this had all taken place, and then treated them to a refreshment at a boardwalk bar. But this fairly normal day would quickly take a bizarre turn. It was now later in the night at about 10:30 p.m., and a strange couple began to walk past them all. The entire group went silent and just stared at them for a moment in total amazement. That's when Borrego stated, "Did you notice the forehead of that man?" But none of the witnesses said a word. They continued to just watch the couple in shock. Borrego then said, "Look at his height. He measures 2 meters tall, easily." Just as they had told the investigator, the two were both very tall and looked to be foreigners. The friends would finally speak and confirm that this was indeed the same couple that they had just seen a couple of weeks earlier. Borrego and Sanchez hopped up from the table and started to follow after the couple who was walking towards the sea. It was a full moon, so they were able to see them fairly well. But this didn't seem to matter, because as they got closer to the water, the two suddenly vanished into thin air. The two men looked around for a bit, but couldn't find them anywhere. But before long, the investigator and the younger witness would see an odd black, soccer ball-sized object flying at them from over the shore. As it got closer, the movements became much more erratic, and it looked like it was being attracted by some invisible force. But they were soon shocked to see that this was no soccer ball. It was actually a faraway humanoid in a black suit, moving at such an incredible speed it appeared as a blur. They would later claim that it looked to have traveled 4 kilometers in just 45 seconds. Even though it was moving this fast, it seems that it didn't kick up any sand and stayed silent the entire time. Soon, it disappeared further down the beach. All Borrego could do now was examine the tracks that the strange couple had left behind on the sand. They appeared just how the witnesses had described them before, but notably, they were not all going in different directions this time. After he was satisfied that the area had been searched for any more evidence, he began to get ready to leave for the night. But then Gonzalez suddenly yelled, "Here they come!" and pointed to the same couple suddenly walking back up towards the boardwalk. One of the witnesses brought out a camera this time and recorded the two as they passed by. Borrego would say that the Nordic-looking man looked at him with unfriendly eyes, while the almost Oriental-looking woman didn't even glance in his direction. They were wearing the same clothes they had been just moments before, but they didn't appear wet or anything like that. They followed the couple into the streets, but soon lost sight of them. They waited around for a bit, but called it a night when they didn't appear to be showing any signs of returning. Later on, they would develop the film, but unfortunately it didn't really show them anything. They said it was like the entities had a veil around them that distorted the film on the camera. Skeptics feel that this was pretty convenient, while believers say that this is actually pretty common when trying to film extraterrestrials. But on the same day the original story came out in the paper, the GEIFO group, which investigates UFO phenomena in Spain, went out and started interviewing witnesses and doing field research. By October 16th, the same newspaper would publish the group's findings. And although the witnesses said that it seemed like the UFO group believed their stories, the newspaper would show differently, with the headline reading, "Corneille's aliens were simple British operatives who placed a telephone cable." They were convinced that the whole incident was just caused by confused young people that misinterpreted what they had seen. They said that it was actually the cable ship Monarch, which according to them was near the coast that night. The other lights they saw were either aircraft, instruments used by the cable boat, or maybe even simply its lanterns. And the flashing lights were simply the boat crew trying to communicate with the ground crew. They would even explain the aliens away as divers that came up for a break at one point. The white robes were actually just towels or blankets, while the weird prints were just made by them removing their flippers. They made the sand pit to cover themselves while they changed clothes, and the blue light was actually just their flashlight. The divers then went into the city center for a bit before heading back out to the boat. The fog they saw was just the wake from the small raft they used to get back and forth from the ship, and the third entity was just another diver that stayed behind to watch over it. Although these explanations satisfied many people, a few saw some problems within them. 5 months after this, in March 1990, Spain's famous UFO hunter, field investigator, and journalist, Juan José Benítez, would read the GEIFO analysis and became one of the few that didn't quite believe everything they said. Eventually, he would describe all of this in his book, with the chapter even called "The GEIFO Lied." Here, he describes how he also went out to the town and interviewed the witnesses, and they were all certain that this was not caused by any boats and divers. He would find that the Monarch had been at sea that night working on laying cables, but they weren't nearly as close to the coast as the article claimed. Benítez would write the chairman of the chief executive of BT Maritime, the oceanographic fleet which owned the Monarch, who quickly wrote back with exact coordinates. This information would actually place the ship around 30 miles away from the coast, and with even the best conditions only allowing one to see about 8 miles out to sea, this meant that it was most likely not the Monarch that the group saw during the first sightings. The letter even stated, "We would not have employed frogmen." Benítez would even contact the captain of the Monarch, who confirmed that they were too far away from the coast for anyone to see them. He would even draw a diagram of the lights, showing that they didn't match up at all with what the witnesses had seen. Oddly, he also went out to the local radar station where he would be told that they were actually malfunctioning from September 27th through September 30th, and they wouldn't be able to show him any data from this time. He would also interview other locals who would tell him of a somewhat open secret. An unmarked military base seemed to be located in this small tourist town. What makes this stranger is that while he was in town, he would even be approached by 2 police officers who had their own story to share involving this facility. Around 2 a.m., December 29th, 1989, they would see 2 silent spotlight-type objects in the sky, first hovering over this military installation, and then over the underwater cable control center. One officer said, "The lights were powerful, dazzling. They were in a horizontal plane and separated from each other by about half a meter, and each were about 1 meter in diameter. They radiated white light, with beams propagating 500 or 600 meters. After a moment, they turned to a very dull orange color before flying off into the distance." Adding to this, the other officer on patrol that night would claim to have seen the exact same thing. It seems that this wouldn't be the only sighting in the area either. Within a few years, multiple reports from the town and the surrounding areas would start to turn up. In September 1982, a man on vacation, Evaristo Fadino, would see some very strange humanoid creatures walking at an alarming pace down the same beach. He first thought that they were only men on horses, but as they very quickly ran past him, he noticed that this was not the case. They were extremely tall men, almost 12 feet in height, and had some strange headgear on them. He wasn't able to make out much more than this though, and they disappeared pretty quickly after that. Another report from the same day as the original sighting, September 29th, 1989, would appear as well. A Jose R. and Marcos A., 20 and 19 years old, were out fishing just a kilometer away from the group of friends on the boardwalk. At around 11 or 11:30, they saw multicolored lights flying around the beach a distance away from them, but didn't think too much of it at the moment. But about half an hour later, they claimed to have seen a strange couple walking down the shore in what looked to be light-colored bathrobes covering most of their bodies. But what really caught their attention was the way they moved. They didn't look to actually walk, and more glided over the ground. They tried to ignore them as they passed by and just fished for a while longer. A police officer then happened by, and they asked him if he had seen anything. He replied simply, no, and they all just shrugged it off and went their separate ways. They didn't think too much more of this until they read the other report in the paper later on. On September 4th, 1992, a lawyer, Lewis S., was visiting a fair in the city. He wore himself out and accidentally fell asleep on the beach, waking up a bit after 10 p.m. Here he would see two incredibly tall creatures moving down the beach. He said that they were nearly synchronized as they moved, but their knees barely even bent. They both wore a one-piece black suit and moved faster than a person on a bike even would. Sometime after the two disappeared into the night, he would come to spy a very bright, odd yellow light flying at a low altitude near the horizon. He watched it for a moment before it started to dim and fade away. Later that night, he also even had nightmares where he was abducted by more of these creatures. In early July 1993, another man, a local of the area, Antonio K., would have his own bizarre encounter. Early in the morning, before the sun came up one day, he decided that he wanted some fish for breakfast and went out to the beach to catch something. But on his way, he saw a figure walking opposite of him. It was so early that it was still quite dark out, so at first he thought it was simply just a really tall man and gestured a greeting as he passed by. But that's when he noticed that this was no normal person. Its clothes were pure black and looked almost glued together. Turning back to get a better look, he immediately saw its oddly large head and oval black eyes. It also looked like it was levitating and not actually walking as it moved. He heard it make a strange whistling sound and decided to reply back in his own whistle. But then, without warning, it moved behind him in an instant. Frightened, he started to attempt to calmly walk away, but in just another moment it was now in front of him again. He quickly stepped to the side and just walked around it, continuing to move away from the beach. He went straight home. One magazine in 1996 even claims that this possibly alien couple had even been spotted recently in the same area. It seems that they were staying at a small guest house and were using German passports. Although they lost track of the two, they would get their names and tried to track them down. But oddly, when they contacted this couple in Germany, they claimed that they hadn't even left the country lately and had never been to Spain at all. And although it doesn't necessarily mean that there were two aliens in disguise, it does lead many to another main theory that could explain everything behind all of these sightings. This area of Spain has long been a very important part of the country. It was originally founded by the Phoenicians before being occupied by the Carthaginians, Romans, Arabs, and so on. Because of its geographical location, it has been an important crossroad throughout Europe's history, and that statement is still true even to this day. There's now evidence that both the Spanish and German secret services had a base in Conil since at least the late 1950s. They made an agreement to use the town as a base for electronic espionage and planned to monitor the Gibraltar Strait. But as times moved on, fiber optic cables began to replace many other methods of communication and were being laid across the ocean, and once again, the town of Conil became another crossroad. On a side note, it is interesting to read that the Monarch actually was laying a new fiber optic cable meant to replace one of these old ones. And if you're wondering what this has to do with alien sightings, it all goes back to the idea that Secret Service has been present in that area for a while. In the 1970s, Germany and Spain signed a new agreement to monitor the data coming through the fiber optics up until 1992. By the 90s, Spain had 5 different links going through the city, with 3 of them being international cables that connected the Americas to Europe and Africa and even the Middle East. This agreement would turn into Operation Delicatesse, and would be called, by many journalists, the largest telephone interception center in the entire world at that time. After WikiLeaks, many more documents were examined, and some showed that the NSA, as well as the French and Spanish government, were all spying on foreign nations, as well as their own citizens through some of these telephone cables. Erich Schmidt in Boom, a German intelligence specialist, has also claimed that the German group involved, BND, also has ties with Italy and China for similar interception purposes. This leads many to wonder if all of these alien sightings could have been caused by these secret agents working in the area. Locals talk of a secret, unmarked military base. Witnesses after the encounter reported seeing strange devices in people's hands and helicopters in the area. Many have also pointed out that spies using other people's passports is actually a common practice in that line of work. All of these data cables are also located in a smaller town that just happens to have a lot of tourists, where foreigners could easily blend in. Many feel like the lights seen in the skies were helicopters or boats operated by some of these spies too. It could explain why the government didn't speak of any other ships in the water during those nights. It could also be why they didn't say anything when the two police officers saw strange lights flying both over the military base and the telecommunications center. The strange couple could have even just been overconfident and wearing equipment that the witnesses had never seen before. But over the years, there has always been the simple theory that the witnesses just made the entire thing up. No photos were ever taken of the trench or footprints, and only recreations were ever shown to most investigators, leaving no proof whatsoever besides witness testimony. This makes some wonder if they could have gotten their inspiration from aliens present in the media at that time. The Nordic man with the large forehead is often compared to an alien race seen in the 1955 movie, This Island Earth. Some even compare the tall third entity to the alien seen in the classic 1951 movie, The Day the Earth Stood Still. Others compare the alien's ability to change forms to the extraterrestrial seen in the 1984 movie, Starman, in which they also take human form and notably use strange technology that appear as glowing blue balls. So in the end, it's pretty hard to know what really happened back then. The witnesses truly believed that they saw UFOs and extraterrestrials, but many don't like that theory. Although many still believe the original GEIFO statement, J.J. Benitez did a good job at proving that the Monarch ship, at least, was not the cause of the flying light sightings or the possible divers. But due to all the secret activity going on in the area, it's hard to say whether some other vehicle could have been the cause for at least some of these sightings. But with that said, the witnesses never did make any money off of all this, and it seems that none of them wanted any popularity from it either. Many felt that they could be embarrassed to speak of this encounter, but that's not the case for all of them at least, with some still openly talking about it to investigators when they come by. So whether or not it was aliens during those nights, they did at least see something that would stick with them for years to come. This case happened right around the same time as another really famous one in Russia, and the two were often talked about together. If you're interested in that, I've also made a video on that case, so be sure to check it out. But thanks for watching everyone, be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you like this type of content, as I'm always making more. If audio format's more your thing, this is available on most podcast platforms. For anyone wanting to show your support, and believe me, I appreciate all the support I get, be sure to check out my Patreon or channel membership page where you can get these videos early and ad-free. With that said, a big thanks to my current members. This was Matt, and I want to believe.